We're going to get started here with our last panel of the day. It's been a long, exciting day, and I'm excited for this wrap-up panel. Here to moderate a wrap-up panel is Paul Krawzak from CQ Roll Call. I'll turn it over to Paul.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've learned a lot today about the challenges facing us, and Congress has, really until sometime next year, to put together a package to prevent the depletion of the disability fund, and Congress may even want to try to wrap this up this year. So there's not a whole lot of time. So we've learned a lot about what some of the potential elements of that package could be, and we'll try to go over some of those and take a look ahead with our panel here. We have Congressman McCrery. We have four experts here in Social Security. Congressman McCrery, Congressman Pomeroy, both served as the chairman of the Social Security Subcommittee on Ways and Means, and Dr. Cohen, who currently serves on the Social Security Advisory Board and also has background as a top advisor at Treasury, Vice President's Office, Senate Finance Committee, and Dr. Warshawsky, who formerly served on the Social Security Advisory Board, served as a Assistant Secretary for Economic Policy at Treasury, at the Federal Reserve, and in other roles. So with that, if I could ask you all to just make some brief opening remarks about what we've heard today, starting with you, Congressman McCrery.
Okay, thank you. And thanks again to everyone for coming today. Thanks again to the staff of CFRB for the good work they've done in putting this conference together. We've talked about a lot of issues today dealing with SSDI. One thing we haven't talked about too much is the politics of it. And since Earl and I are here and we're probably more expert on the politics of Congress than we are on SSDI, that's why we got these smart guys here. We alluded this morning in our opening remarks, both Earl and I, to a legislative opportunity, and we wanted to leverage that opportunity to try to improve the SSDI program. Well, of course, you all know the legislative opportunity is the imminent exhaustion of the SSDI trust fund at the end of 2016. Now, we think this is a legislative opportunity because I think Earl and I agree Congress is going to do something. They're not going to just cut benefits by 19%. They're going to do something. They're going to pass a legislative act. So that's the legislative opportunity. There will be a vehicle to which we could attach some reforms to SSDI. Now, what are the odds that there will be a vehicle that will carry things other than a simple transfer of funds? That remains to be seen. And I think our moderator is right that Congress perhaps would like to pass something this year to get this off the radar screen. My experience in Congress has been generally that we don't do anything unless we have to, until we have to. So as nice as that would be to get something done this year, I don't expect that. I expect this, unfortunately, to come to a head next year and probably late next year, possibly even in a lame duck session next year. Because after all, it doesn't expire. I mean, it's not exhausted until December. So we could go right up to Christmas with a solution. And that way, you're past the election. You know, you don't have to deal with this during the campaign. Oh yeah, we're going to fix that. And so you do it in the lame duck session, which in the case of those of us seeking reforms may in fact be a better place to deal with this because the elections are just over. So sometimes you can have some more bipartisan cooperation when the election is not looming. So that's just a few thoughts on the politics of this, and I'll turn it over to Earl, and he can disagree with me or expound on what I've said.
Well, Jim, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's going to be pretty hard with an election looming to get people very excited about any reform that's got some dimension to it. Certainly most of the ideas, and they were really interesting ideas discussed today, would probably be a bit bold for the appetite of Congress as they careen toward an election. On the other hand, the point's been made to us very forcefully that the population dependent upon that SSDI benefit is watching closely, and they are nervous. And to think that we're lame duck up against the benefit cut is really an unsavory proposition we would be doing and causing an awful lot of needless mental distress. I don't mind political games for those that care to participate in the political arena. You get roughed up, bumped around, dumped on your backside once in a while. Well, that's just all part of the deal. But where they're utterly innocent folks just kind of getting roughed up in the crossfire, I really hate that. I can see that happening the longer we go till getting something resolved. Things that I just would note by way of opening comments. We want to really get to the experts here. The thread that ran through the day about the value of work to an individual, the importance of it, we need to do a better job expanding opportunities to work. We need to look very carefully at incentives that are pushing people away from work. We had that from so many perspectives through the course of the day, from the left to the right to the in-between, and from our extremely forceful disability advocates. So we really should look at what can be done to advance that proposition. Other issues go to a process. It gets a little in the weeds. Will this be a time for something bold on process reform? I certainly don't know that. I thought the presentation on technology was particularly interesting because obviously we've had a revolution in technology before we've done a good look at whether or not there might be an effective way to capture, very cost effectively, some of the ongoing utilization of technology and evaluating the appropriateness of claims paid. Now, obviously, that is going to butt up against some privacy considerations of people that are on the SSDI program. They have to be on it as well, so trying to find that balance. But I think there's opportunity for some work there. I'm interested in the notion of the siloed DI programs working better together. And I'm fairly interested in what could be done to expand the private sector participation. A couple of words about why I think that might be a good deal. Long before we could spin up a SSDI system-wide early intervention rehab model, back to work if you can, I think that there's a lot of capacity already within the private sector that would be brought to bear through a broader broader DI coverage in the workplace. On the other hand, the opt-out provision, just to be blunt about it, that's the marketing tool of all time. You're going to buy it unless you understand enough to say no, you don't want it. Well, if you give somebody a marketing opportunity like that, you probably want to ask something in return. How about 2 years before they can apply for SSDI? Something like that. That's just talking here. That's the fun about doing this outside of public office. But I do think okay, the private sector, you put an ask forward, we'll consider it, we're going to have an ask back for you, and then determining what's the appropriate balance where the equities might lie. That'd be something to ponder going forward as well. So those are my initial thoughts, just on procedural wise. We're going to have a menu. Jim and I are still discussing whether or not we kind of try to take a little here, a little there, put a dose of political reality over the top of it, so we're advancing something we think is politically viable and deserves that kind of consideration, where we cobble together a set of McCrery-Pomeroy recommendations. We haven't decided yet. Your ongoing input in terms of whether we should, and if we should, what ought to be in it, we're sure open, all ears for that. It's been a great conversation today, and we want the conversation to continue even after adjournment here and into the weeks ahead. Thank you.
Dr. Cohen, would you like to share any thoughts?
I have quite a few. I thought I was going to give some prepared remarks, so if you don't mind, I'll
Good.
go ahead with that. Thanks. I'd like to begin my discussion with bringing up one thing about the disability program that hasn't been addressed at all today, but is very, very important. And that is the fact that there are currently more than 1 million disability claimants who are waiting for their appeals to be heard by administrative law judges. Even after taking into account the need to have some hearings in the pipeline, there is still a backlog of many hundreds of thousands of hearings. Now, this backlog obviously results in huge processing times for these appeals. In some hearings offices, the average of all hearing offices is 1 year and 4 months. But in some hearings offices, you may have to wait as much as 2 years. And these hearings are only one piece of the application process for disability insurance. And claimants who exercise all of their appeal rights can wait as much as 4 years for final determinations of their claims. During this 4-year period, most of these claimants have no earnings. This creates obviously severe hardships for them. In fact, thousands of claimants actually die each year waiting for decisions on their appeals. Now, one of the primary causes of these unconscionable delays is inadequate funding of SSA's administrative costs. We did not tolerate this sort of backlog when it came to our nation's veterans, and we should not tolerate it in our Social Security system. That's how I feel. Now, I should add that the inadequate funding also results in other poor service to the public. For example, there are often significant delays to processing beneficiaries' earnings reports. The average processing time for these reports is 270 days. This results in large and preventable overpayments to these beneficiaries. Beneficiaries can be hit with sudden notices of huge overpayments through no fault of their own after having faithfully reported all of their earnings. This can be a significant work disincentive. Just imagine if you did everything right and you reported all your earnings month after month, and then you received a notice many months later saying you owe $30,000 back and that you have to pay it back. That's a terrible situation. We've got to be able to avoid that. Now, rather than being given added funding in recent years by Congress, SSA has suffered from inadequate funding in the recent years, certainly since 2011. And since 2011, SSA has suffered a net loss of 5,600 employees. This is at a time when we have so many unmet needs. They don't even have enough people to meet the needs, basic needs, and to fix the problems I'm talking about is going to require more staff and more resources. So I have to unfortunately report to you today that neither the House nor Senate Appropriations Committee's bills for this year, for 2016, provide enough funding. This problem should be and it must be addressed as these bills move through the Congress. I can't say it more strongly than that. We don't want people waiting 4 years or 2.5 years or what to get their benefits, and the only way we're going to get that avoided is to have more resources provided for SSA. Now, turning to the options the solutions we've been discussing all day today, there's one proposal that I find especially promising, and that's the proposal for the Medicaid buy-in, and improved Medicaid buy-in. Why is this proposal promising? Well, long-term services and supports, most notably personal attendant care, as was mentioned before today, is what allows many people with disabilities to work. These services are not covered by most health insurance policies, and they're generally unaffordable for all but the highest earners. State Medicaid buy-in programs help fill this gap. There's a tremendous gap there, and it's being filled in significant part by state Medicaid buy-in programs, but not all, because while most states have Medicaid buy-in programs, not all do, and these programs vary widely, as Mark Perriello mentioned, the services and supports offered, and the income and resource limits for eligibility. And one key challenge that workers with disability faced is portability, which was also mentioned by Mark, that if you move across state lines and you have a lower asset limit in the state that you're moving to, suddenly you're not in compliance, whereas you work in compliance in the state that you move from. That's obviously not a good situation. We need a national Medicaid buy-in program with generous income and asset limits. And in addition, we need an enhanced federal match that could ensure that there are no additional costs to the states. Now, one proposal that I have strong concerns about is to have a government representative attend all the ALJ hearings. This proposal was tried as an experiment in the early 1980s. It was terminated after it was found that the government reps generally acted in adversarial roles, that it did not improve decision-making, and that there were a whole bunch of other problems for it, including high cost. The pilot cost $1 million in 1986, and that was just enough to put government reps in 5 offices. Today there are 160 offices. So this is an expensive proposal, and it didn't work. It was also found to be, I believe, unconstitutional and in violation of the Social Security Act, just to top it off there. Now, continuing my discussion of the McCrery-Pomeroy disability solutions, I want to focus on several proposals that include temporary benefits for large numbers of SSDI beneficiaries and current law benefits for those who can't work. And we had several proposals that provided for these temporary benefits. And I have to say that I'm worried that temporary benefit approach is not too feasible. Under current law, there are very strict eligibility requirements and criteria, and these result in a population of SSDI beneficiaries of which a large proportion can't work at all. The temporary benefits proposal is going to be infeasible or mostly infeasible for people who can't work at all. It's just not. You're trying to mix apples and oranges there. It's not going to work. Now, if only a few beneficiaries could be affected by these proposals because they can't work, some might suggest that maybe we could have budget savings by cutting the size of benefits. Perhaps we could compensate by doing this. However, is a really bad option in my opinion. SSDI benefits, as was mentioned earlier, are an average of $1,165 a month. That's very modest. 1 in 5 SSDI beneficiaries lives in poverty, and that's even with benefits. And without benefits, half of SSDI beneficiaries live in poverty. Half of the SSDI beneficiaries live in poverty if they didn't have SSDI. That's a very telling statistic. And there are additional pointers to make about why benefits should not be cut. For 8 in 10 SSDI beneficiaries, SSDI is a sole or primary source of income. And I'm going to add also that 1 million veterans get SSDI. And I don't think we're going to want to be in a situation where we're doing anything that would hurt veterans in that way. So there are other problematic outcomes of the temporary benefits, in my opinion. First, they can throw out of whack budget calculations, because if you're suggesting that a lot of beneficiaries can work and that they don't need benefits, and that doesn't happen, then your budget estimates are out of whack. The tone of the proposal, the emphasis on the temporary nature of benefits is going to create anxiety for the many beneficiaries who can't work. And that's a serious problem under my view. And for beneficiaries whose benefits are terminated, the proposal allows for regaining benefits without filing a full-blown application again. That's a good thing. But presumably this is going to require a CDR in order to demonstrate that you can't work. Otherwise, they're not going to restore your benefits. And we're going to have many of these CDRs adding up for individuals, plus all across all of the ones that need CDRs, all the individuals. And this could cost a great deal of money and be very administratively unwieldy. My view, why not just fund the existing CDRs fully without having a temporary benefits program at all? I think you might get to the same point without all of these problems. Now, turning to another aspect of quite a few of the McCrery-Pomeroy solutions today, several of the proposals include early intervention features. We've discussed that a lot today. Under the extremely strict Social Security disability standard, the vast majority of current beneficiaries have extremely limited work capacity and are not going to return to work at a level where they can leave the program. So therefore, we should be focusing on our efforts to people before they receive benefits, and ideally before they ever reach the doors of the Social Security Administration. To that end, early intervention approaches are well worth exploring in my view, and I think that was the view of a lot of other people here today. As we consider early interventions, we must keep in mind 3 important things. One, approaches must be tested. We currently lack the evidence base we need to know what will be effective and what won't. As was said also today earlier, no funds, either for early intervention pilots or for eventual scaled-up early intervention programs, should come out of the Social Security trust funds. That's not the purpose of the Social Security trust funds. And finally, as was also mentioned today, early intervention should be carried out by an agency other than SSA, for example, the Labor Department. SSA is in the business of determining eligibility for benefits and delivering payment of benefits. It's not in the business of helping workers get back to work. We should look to agencies who have the expertise and the mission related to getting people back to work to help workers with disabilities remain attached to the workforce. And I'm going to close by making two broad points, if I can. And the first is that none of the policy proposals for SSDI that are being made, and nothing that we can do between now and the end of 2016, short of cutting benefits across the board by 20%, none of this will obviate the need for reallocation of the trust fund, of the payroll tax, or merging of the OAS and DI trust funds, which is another way to get to the same point. Without reallocation or merging of the trust funds, a series of short-term fixes would be needed. But beneficiaries are already terrified that their benefits are going to be cut across the board. A series of short-term fixes would be unfair, in my opinion, to beneficiaries because it would keep them continually in fear of across-the-board benefit cuts. And as Bob Greenstein mentioned earlier today, this is just one of many reasons why interfund borrowing is also unacceptable. My second and last point is this. If we are interested in helping people to provide people with more income security and people with disabilities with more income security and giving them a shot at employment and economic security, we must recognize that there is a much broader policy landscape impacting workers with disabilities than just this SSA disability programs. Many people with disabilities confront a great many of policy failures and gaps long before they ever reach the doors of the Social Security Administration. To that end, we should strongly consider policies that affect a broader swath of the population, such as raising the minimum wage, expanding EITC benefits for childless workers, ensuring access to paid leave and sick days, and ensuring access to long-term services and supports. That's my discussion.
Dr. Warshawsky.
Thank you for the invitation to come to talk about this very important topic. And I want to start by commending the committee by taking this on. Some people just want to sweep this under the rug and say, well, we'll just reallocate the funding and move on. The program is perfect. It's ideal. It does what it was intended to do 50 years ago, and we don't need to consider it anymore. So the fact that we are here is a great thing, because it shows that, in fact, the program is not perfect. There are a lot of improvements that can be made. I think one theme that I heard today is that it's not a modern program. The world has changed dramatically since SSDI was put in place in 1956. It's changed dramatically even since the main regulations that are implemented in terms of eligibility criterion, which were in the late 70s. That's 40 years ago. The world has changed. Technology has changed. The labor force has changed. The economy has changed. The nature of disability has dramatically changed. And so I think the insolvency is an opportunity for us to be creative and work together and make changes, and reform is totally reasonable thing to do. I think one of the slides said, if not now, when? And I very much agree with that sentiment. What I will do very briefly is to give a little bit more introductory context for why I think there are serious problems in the program as it is currently put together. Basically, Jason Fichtner and I sometimes are a tag team on this, and he showed a few slides, but he didn't show a couple of the slides which I like. And unfortunately, I didn't bring them with me, but there are two that I think are very important. Number one is, if you look at the incidence rate of disability in Social Security, even controlling, and this is right out of the trustees report, even controlling for age, for gender, so all these demographic things that were discussed, it's gone up a lot. So we're not just talking about a demographic inevitable increase in costs in the program. The costs have grown up so dramatically that over a very short period of time, basically over the last 14 years, it's not just demographics. And there's a lot that has gone on which is encouraging people to apply and to get benefits. The other thing which, another slide, is to look at the approval rate of the administrative law judges. And this is even over a shorter period of time, just over the period of time from 2009-10 to 2013-14, basically the approval rate of administrative law judges has dropped from about 70% on average to about below 50%. That's a very dramatic change of something which should be, if the law is being observed, and if the law is, and the regulations are straightforward, should not have that much variability. Now, there is some element of economy of the business cycle, but that too, this is not an economic program. This is a disability program. That should have very small impact. The fact that it has had such a great impact, I think we have an explanation for that. The explanation is the administration, Social Security Administration, has made many changes, and this is both true under the prior commissioner, and I believe it's true under the current commissioner as well, in terms of how those claims are adjudicated. Probably a major change was the number of cases that an administrative law judge is allowed to hear in a year. It was the case that you had many judges were hearing well in excess of 1,000, sometimes even a few were in the 2,000, 2,500 a year adjudication. It is impossible to adjudicate a claim fairly, certainly to the taxpayer, at that rate. It is absolutely impossible. These are very complex decisions. They have been denied. So already, the easy claims have already been picked out at the DDS level. These are complex cases in dealing with very sensitive issues. It is impossible to do, I think, according to the OIG of the Social Security Administration and other studies, 600 is ambitious a year. My personal feeling is 500 is about the right number. So it was the case that these very high caseloads led inevitably to very high approval rates. Because if you're going to churn the cases, you can't write a denial. I mean, that takes time. You can write an approval, and that's easy to do. So I think these facts, and they are facts, I think indicate that there have been problems in the program. Some of them, have been addressed, but I think, and we just heard today, we have a backlog again, and the existence of the backlog puts pressure on the system politically and administratively to again sort of build up. Let's just pay the claims. So I think the program is indeed in need of serious reform. I think a reasonable approach, if we could put it together, in fact, would be a loan from the retirement fund, paired with a reasonable prospect of paying off the loan, which would be from the reform of the program. I think that's a totally reasonable approach, policy-wise. I don't know if it's politically feasible, but it's certainly policy-wise a totally reasonable thing to do, and it would be, again, our opportunity to deal with the problems of the program. I'll mention one other thing in terms of, since Alan did get down into a little bit in the weeds of some of the specific proposals that were discussed today. I was very impressed with the panel. I was impressed with all the panels. I thought the creativity of all the ideas were great. But in terms of what I think is most immediately doable, the discussion by the ALJ, the discussion about the reconsideration level, and also particularly the discussion about technology, I think, and that's why I asked the question, if you may recall, of the technology paper. Is it doable in terms of without any changes in law? And I believe we got the answer was that the answer is yes. So those, I think, that's low-hanging fruit in terms of picking for reform of the program. I think all of those would have very beneficial impact on the accuracy of the adjudication process and on the fairness of the program.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the things Congress is considering doing is putting into a disability legislative package is a work benefit offset program, where at a certain level of earnings, instead of a complete benefit cutoff, you would lose $1 of benefits for every $2 in earnings. There's a demonstration project going on right now where the earnings, where the threshold is at the $1,090 a month level. But the threshold could be set below that. So my question is, and maybe start off with you, Dr. Cohen, is do we know enough about benefit offset programs to actually make them part of legislation, number one, or do we need further demonstration projects? And do you think that kind of approach could encourage work?
I think the answer, I think we do need, what we need is further demonstration projects. We don't, some of the early demonstration projects had some problems with them. One of them, I believe, was suspended. We need information on how this, what would happen if we did this offset, the 1 for 2 or 2 for 1 that you mentioned. And your second question was what?
Do you think a benefit offset program in general can help encourage work and disability?
Compared to the status quo, yes, definitely. This cliff is clearly a disincentive to work. If you're going to have to, any dollars you earn over the cliff, you're going to have to give back the whole, all of your benefits. That's something obviously people aren't going to do. And so I think that if it's just a case of comparing a world status quo with a world status quo plus the benefit offset undoubtedly will contribute to be an incentive to work. The case that was mentioned in one of the proposals here today was one that in which at the same time you were doing that, you were lowering the cliff. And then we don't know what's going to happen. And, but that's a totally different proposal. So the short answer to your question is yes.
Okay. Dr. Warshawsky, do you think we know enough to actually put this in legislation this year or next year?
Unfortunately, no, we don't know enough. But I will say that, and this is maybe a little wonky or a little methodology, I don't necessarily think we need to do everything as a demonstration project. I think another thing that has advanced over the 50 years is the ability of the analysts, econometrics, other statistical techniques to tease out very reliable results, but from less grand and expensive ways of gathering information. And I think that this issue of the offset, which does need to be designed carefully, I don't think you need necessarily a grand, $25 million, 17-year-long demonstration. I think it can be done, if smarts are applied to it, I think you can do it in more modest terms with as similar accuracy. I will also say, though, that I think there's other low-hanging fruit that I think it would be very strong in terms of a work incentive and more immediate, and that in fact, the actuary has scored as being very beneficial. And that is, right now, there is this dissonance between the increase in the normal retirement age and the way the disability program works. So for people, older workers, say people in their late 50s, early 60s, there's really a very strong incentive to try to get on disability and to continue to be on the disability rolls until you turn 60, your normal retirement age, say 67, and your benefit is not cut. Whereas, let's say your disability is modest, you might ordinarily want to do an early retirement, but then your benefit is cut. So I think trying to solve, excuse me, sort of reconcile those incentives right now, and we know that this exists. I mean, again, the actuary tells us it exists. We could work on that problem, and that would be an immediate impact on work incentives.
Congressman, do you have any thoughts on work incentive programs as part of disability?
Well, one of the threads running through the presentations today was providing incentives to work for SSDI recipients, and that idea is one. There are many others. I think there's overwhelming desire on the part of policymakers to figure out ways to encourage people who are on SSDI to work. There are a lot of reasons for that. We've talked about them. Technology, just changes in healthcare, all kinds of reasons why disabled persons who may not have been able to work 25 years ago today can indeed do very productive work. So yes, there's a strong incentive, I think, on the part of policymakers and stakeholders to find a way to encourage people who are on SSDI to go back to work or continue to work.
I just want to respond to the notion of harmonizing the benefit levels between disability and old age, the trust fund. It's a tough one. On the one hand, without question, someone 60 years old develops a difficulty, can't do the job they're doing. They really are going to be highly motivated to try and get the determination so they have the SSDI benefit, and they won't be pushed into the discounted Social Security by having to basically tread water unemployed and grab the first opportunity to get your Social Security, your regular Social Security payment program. I'm 62, about to turn 63. I intend to work till I'm 70 because I want the higher Social Security payment level. I think if you would just equate, if you get SSDI, you're going to get your 62, the lowest level of Social Security, and we're going to push you over to the old age fund. You're going to basically be relegating people to an extremely modest income stream and poverty in old age. So, on the one hand, I certainly see some of the merit to that consideration, but I'm convinced that there are much more downsides than upsides to that one when thinking about the fairness to the individual and forcing them to have that steeply discounted Social Security income for the rest of their lives. That, remember, let's make sure the adjudication process works well. Let's not pay anybody who shouldn't be fully qualified for that SSDI benefit. So we're talking about someone that can qualify to get the SSDI benefit. And if they can qualify because they cannot work, then I don't think you want to push them into that lowest level of Social Security annuity stream.
To avoid exhaustion of the fund, there will either need to be reallocation or a loan, inter-fund loan. And there's disagreement here about whether which is best. So, but you suggested the idea of an inter-fund loan with a plan attached to repay it, a reform plan attached to repay it. Can you talk about what might be in that reform plan?
Well, basically, the reform plan would be the sum of all the ideas that have been presented here. There are others outside of this conference that I have a few myself, and many others have ideas. And I think through the political process, you winnow through all that. But it's certainly the case that you can sum it up ideas such that you could pay the loan. I don't think that's at all an undoable task. I mean, here another aspect of just to be specific and to introduce an idea which hasn't been discussed, which I have written about, is the element of age, language, and education, which is introduced in the vocational medical grid, which about more than half of claims are adjudicated on the basis of, actually in part to respond to Congressman Pomeroy, when you're 60, it is easier by the regulations to get on the program. In other words, somebody who's otherwise exactly the same except for age, in one case could not get on disability, in the other case can get onto disability. Now again, this is a challenging policy issue, but it is possible to, this is a major, major cost saving. Okay. And it is, things like this are certainly possible in terms of a reform program.
Dr. Cohen, why do you think a loan is a bad idea?
I think a loan is a bad idea because I don't think we could combine 100 of the proposals we heard today, and we still wouldn't have enough money to pay off the loan. These proposals are not going to save that much. We don't even know. Some of them may cost money, as was mentioned earlier, and we certainly don't know and have enough information now to know how they'll be in 2, 3, 4 years. We have demo projects. We may know more in 10 years. But even if you took all of these things together, what we know in the short term, the only way you can fix the problem is through reallocation. The interfund borrowing, the fund would have to pay back the loan, and it would be given no money to pay for it, so it would have to take out another loan. And therefore, the Social Security Disability Insurance Trust Fund would keep getting deeper and deeper into debt, and that's not something I think we would want to countenance. So I think that reallocation is the way to go, and I think that then we should use the time after that to try to come up with a comprehensive plan to fix both the both the Social Security and the Disability Trust Funds, both the OASI and the DI Trust Funds, and get the whole system into actuarial balance. Once we take care of the reallocation problem and this problem, then we got to get really serious. We don't want to wait till 2032 to start working on the long-run problems. You got to work on them now or soon so that there's time for them to be phased in. So that's what we need to be putting our focus on, not on interfund borrowing, which is just going to keep kicking the can down the road with the borrowing needs having to be continually rolled over.
Okay, we'll go to audience questions in a second, but first, Congressman Pomeroy, do you have any thoughts on loan versus reallocation?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of confusion out there already about which fund. Is there a trust fund? Is there balance in it? I mean, to me, you do the public a massive disservice by adding the further complexity of a loan, which is essentially a fiction because there's nothing, no one is proposing a level of benefit cuts which would be totally draconian to be able to repay the loan, or for that matter, the payroll tax hikes, which would be equally steep if you're going to try and do it on the revenue side. So in all likelihood, it's basically a face-saving fiction, so you can go home and say it'll be paid back later, when in reality, all you're doing is adding an additional element of confusion where there's already plenty, and I think it'd be a bad idea to go that route.
Congressman McCrery, any thoughts on that?
I think the most intelligent thing said today was just said by Mr. Cohen, that we really need to address both OASI and the Disability Trust Fund long-term to fix this. We should have done it 20 years ago, but that's what should be done. I don't care if it's a loan or if it's a transfer. I don't think it amounts to a hill of beans, the difference. As Earl said, it's a fiction either way. So we need to look at solutions, modern solutions to this problem. And what you're doing today, what you've done today, and the authors of these papers have done, is provide a few examples of some small things that can be done that may have long-term savings associated with them. Some of them may cost, but we need to look at all that. But we also need to look at Social Security retirement benefits as well, and the financing mechanism for that. So, sorry.
Okay, thank you. If you have any questions, that would be great. There.
Jim Meltzner, thank you all for your comments. You talk about the backlog, Mr. Cohen, and then at the same time, some of the proposals that were mentioned that might help reduce the backlog, you kind of very much dismiss, such as a government representative. And you cite an example from the 1980s where a study was done, a pilot program. Well, the 1980s was a long time ago, and a lot has changed. I'm just wondering if I told you that a government rep might help the backlog by 20 or 30% to reduce it significantly, would you think about it in a different way?
No. I think that the government rep is a bad idea. We have the experience from 1984. It is a long time ago. But in looking at that experience, I think it does translate to today. And what we need to get down the backlog is to have more resources given so that we can have more judges and they can hear more cases, given the fact that we're going to restrict that they shouldn't. I don't want to go back to having a judge doing 800 cases a year, but we need more money to hire more judges, and we need the Office of Personnel Management to make it easier for the Social Security Administration to get more judges that they can hire.
Thank you.
Mr. Cohen, Alan, would it change your opinion if I told you that adding more judges is not necessarily going to improve efficiency or economy? It may put more people out there hearing the cases, but the way the cases are being heard, the way the adjudication process is being handled, I think is inefficient. Therefore uneconomical, and I think there's got to be some better way to do it.
I'm all for more efficiencies in the way we do our adjudication process. I support the proposal that was discussed before, which is that now a judge can't be hearing 800 cases a year because he's going to make a lot of awards with that. He or she is going to make a lot of awards with that. But the bottom line is, if we have improvements in adjudication, we ought to do them. But that's not a substitute for not getting more resources. We have to have more resources. When you have more resources, you have more judges. When you have more judges, you hear more cases and the backlog goes down. We successfully did this back in the years 2006, 7, and 8. We hired more judges, we got the backlog down, it was coming down, and then the Congress shifted hands, and whatever happened, and the resources were not as many resources were being applied to the agency as they had been in the few years before that. And sure enough, the backlog went up, and now it's off the charts. So I'm not against improving adjudication. If there's anything we can do to improve efficiency, I'm all for it. But we need more resources too.
I'll make just a very brief comment to sort of. I'm not sure I actually am also, and here I think I agree with Alan maybe for different reasons. Mainly the cost of introducing another Social Security employee in the process. But with that being said, I think we are, having the judge basically wear, I guess it's called the three-hat rule, having the judge serve as, trying to promote the claimant, the government, the taxpayer, and as well as sort of impartially hearing the case is hard. And particularly when that sort of approach was originally designed, there were not many third-party representatives or lawyers involved. I mean, and now we understand it's 80. I saw 85% number of cases, hearings, where there is such a third party. So I think changing the rules, such as, for example, closing the case and the record in a timely fashion is a totally reasonable thing to do. And I think that would improve efficiency. And it's a mystery to me as to why there's been so much resistance to that, given the change in the reality of that there are professionals now involved representing the claimant.
Could I make a quick comment on the discussion about the age of retiring at age 62? And that is to say, pointing to the grid, which is that's called the grid. After a certain age, you take into account your age, your economic factors, and your education, and figuring out whether there are any jobs available for you in the national economy. And I think that's a good idea. We should come up with a grid which we think makes the most sense. But the grid is there for a reason, and so it doesn't substitute for the fact that say, well, we've got the grid, now we can have people take their real retirement at age 62 when they have to take a huge cut because they're retiring at an early retirement age. I think we should figure out what we want to do with the grid and have that policy and then stick with that. And then given that, I don't think we would not have a need, nor should we, be having people having to retire at age 62. I think when the retirement age goes up to 67, which it will sometime in the near future, the difference between retiring at 67, the normal retirement age, and 62, the early retirement age, is at least a 30% cut, maybe more than that. And I don't think it's fair to take that on these disability beneficiaries and say they got to start when at age 62 with benefits that are cut 30% relative to what they would get if they retired at age 67. Whereas now, if they're on disability, then they stay on disability until they reach the normal retirement age, and they're not going to be suffering a cut for retiring early, because when they're on 62, they'll be on disability and not on a retirement program. So I think that we definitely should not do something that makes disability convert over to retirement at age 62. I think that would be harm the income of lots of retirees.
Question, I guess, there, and then we'll go there.
Hi, Lisa Ekman, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the benefit offset, because I think it is really important that as we look at a benefit offset, we get it right. Because you asked, will it increase work? Well, it actually, if the components of it are wrong, like the threshold for when you start offsetting earnings, the benefit from earnings is too low, it could actually do the opposite and disincentivize work, so that individuals, we see when we look at earning patterns of beneficiaries, they often start out at very low earnings. And if they're going to get their benefit offset at a very low level of earnings, it would be more likely that people wouldn't even try to work. And so you have to look at where you set the offset level and also what else goes with it. So another really important piece is to have permanent attachment to the program, so that an individual who tries to work and may actually get their earnings up and then has a medical setback doesn't have to worry about the fact that they can no longer get back easily on benefits. So I think it's really important that we move cautiously, because the design of the benefit offset is really important. All of the pieces that go with it are also really important, and you could actually end up having the opposite effect. You also could end up making beneficiaries significantly worse off economically if the threshold for where the benefit offset begins is set too low. And so I think we all share the goal of increasing the economic well-being of individuals with disabilities and making work pay for them, and we don't want to design a benefit offset and make any changes to the program that would actually create the opposite incentives for beneficiaries, make it less likely for them to work, and make them economically worse off.
Do you have any reaction to that
I concur.
statement?
Yeah, I basically, I agree with the initial comment was that we don't know enough. I think it can be designed, but we don't know enough.
And we would all agree, I think, that it depends on where you put that level.
Those
You put the level at the
design
wrong
is very
place,
important. Yes.
You'll sort of disincent anything.
This is a comment on the question.
At the beginning of the day, Senator Hatch made the point that there would be some focus on integrity and fraud, but I didn't see much in the way in the program that it specifically addressed integrity or fraud. Are there items in here that you would think would fit into that category? And which ones would you think would have some legs in that regard?
I mean, I didn't see anything in the program today, but I mean, there are such proposals. I think one aspect of it is that, and I think the OIG has identified this as an issue, and that is there are very few referrals to the state's attorney, when SSA, at whatever level, it could be the administrative law judges see something, or the, even at the DDS level, and or they see patterns, the staff of the agency itself. There are very few referrals for criminal prosecution, and I understand that the agency will say it's not worth it, but you don't know if it's worth it until you try. And furthermore, I think there's very strong, if you do a little bit of publicity with those referrals as well, it has an impact on people's behavior. But no, that hasn't been discussed at the
I think
program.
the consensus on nobody should be paid benefits who doesn't deserve the benefits under the program is really been a continuing theme. One of the areas of complete consensus through the advisory committee and and the work. I felt in particular the technology presentation had potential relative to continuing disability review enhancement. That would certainly get at, seeing someone that's still getting a benefit maybe shouldn't have one anymore.
And you can rest assured there's plenty of interest on the Hill to look for solutions involving fraud, the question of fraud. So I'm not terribly disappointed that we don't have papers on fraud detection in this effort. There's going to be plenty of people out there with plenty of ideas on fraud.
One of the best ideas that's out there, some people believe, relates to having an increased number of CDIs, which are cooperative disability investigations. These are wonderful things where the IG and his folks partner with local law enforcement, and I think it's now in 28 cities across the United States. And they work together to come up and combat fraud, and they've been highly successful in doing that. And it's only in 28 states. We should expand it as many cities as we can. There may be some limit to how many you can do new ones each year, but let's start ramping it up here. If the program is good enough in 28 cities, it's good enough in the rest of the cities. And this is a proposal I think that would be very valuable.
We have time for just one more question, unfortunately, and you've been waiting a long time.
You may be sorry you let me ask. As a former administrator, when I hear you talking about the backlog and hiring more ALJs, I worry, I think we can all agree that at some point, probably not too far along, that backlog's going to come down. Alan disagrees.
I disagree.
Okay, well, I guess it's a good discussion. If it doesn't come down, you could still take this idea. Back during the Clinton administration, there was a pretty well-developed proposal to work with the ABA to appoint temporary judges. With the current situation of underemployed lawyers who are very talented, I wonder why we couldn't take the opportunity to appoint some. Now, if the backlog continues, then hire them permanently, but give them a 2-year appointment or something. There's plenty of ways of doing it, and as I say, it was well thought out. But the point is, you've got a lot of young ALJs coming in, and I think that you're not going to have the kinds of retirement that you may have had in the past in the next 10 years. But that's my opinion, and we can look at the demographics. I think I'm right.
The demographics, when I've looked at the numbers, we've got hundreds of thousands of cases, maybe 600,000 in the backlog. This is not the million, but I'm just being conservative with the numbers, taking out of the backlog those that need to be in the pipeline. And the remainder is a backlog, and the arithmetic is there. The only way you're going to get these things done faster, as opposed to done at the current rate, is to have more judges hearing more cases per year. Now, if you want to make temporary judges, that's fine with me. I'd have to look at that proposal on its own merits, but the bottom line is that we need more judicial power now in terms of number of cases heard per year. That's the only way we're going to get the backlog down, and I think that we should do everything we can to try to make that happen.
I think the idea of having term limits for the judges is a good idea, and in part it relates to the flexibility the agency needs to sort of do appropriate staffing. I think 2 years probably is a little too short. There's a lot of training that is currently done for the ALJs, and it is a very complex law. So that sounds to me like not enough time, but I think we're on to something.
I'd like to thank our panelists. Dr. Warshawsky, I may have neglected to mention you're a visiting scholar at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Dr. Cohen, you're a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Congressman McCrery, Congressman Pomeroy, we look forward to your further work in this project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.